I'm Claudia Bester. I'm the Director of Public Programs and Education here at the Hammer Museum, and I'm very pleased to introduce tonight's program on the banking industry. The Hammer forms a series of public discussions about current social and political issues, and it's made possible with the generous support of Andy and Branya Galef, for which I'd like to thank them very much. Thank you. Tonight's distinguished guest is economist and legal scholar William Black, and our moderator is Ian Masters. Ian is a BBC-trained broadcast journalist who's covered national security affairs for over 25 years on public radio. He's the host of Background Briefing on KPFK, Sundays from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. He was a senior fellow at UCLA's Center for Strategic and International Affairs and the UCLA Center for International Relations, and was a consultant to the Center for National Security Studies at Los Alamos in New Mexico. So please join me in welcoming Ian Masters.
Thank you, Claudia. Well, here we are, the stress-tested with troubled assets facing foreclosure as we wait for bailouts in the subprime of our lives. Thank you all for coming. What happened? Banks used to avoid risk and manage your money better than you could. That was their job, to keep your money safer than stuffing it in a mattress. And they used to operate in the conservative comfort zone of the 3-6-3 ethic, borrowing money at 3%, loaning it out at 6%, and getting to the golf course by 3 p.m. Then along came Ronald Reagan, who vowed to put handcuffs on the welfare queens and take the shackles off the millionaires. Shortly thereafter, we had the savings and loan meltdown, which brings us our guest, who was that disaster's chief investigator following the money. But that was a mere rehearsal for tonight's discussion, the great American bank robbery. In today's meltdown, one bank, Indy Bank, cost the taxpayer more than the whole S&L ripoff. Tonight we will learn how ideology-enabled criminality and political failure led to economic crisis as Wall Street bought Capitol Hill, allowing a select few to rig their own private casino, manufacture their own chips, leverage the pot into the stratosphere, bet the house and bring it down, only to be rescued by the beleaguered taxpayer who is told that the overcompensated who brought us to the brink of global financial collapse are too big to fail and must be bailed out, not blamed. Meanwhile, they avoid the punishment of capitalism as they enjoy the rewards of socialism. And even though we own them, they won't even show us the books to find out how bad the mess they made is. Starting in 1987, instead of rewarding savings and as a substitute for increasing wages, Alan Greenspan opened the floodgates of credit, ladling out cheap money with lower and lower interest rates to encourage consumption on credit. Then, as we produced less and consumed more, buying too much stuff we could not afford with money we did not have, borrowed from the Chinese and the Japanese, we end up 3 decades later with a few winners and a lot of losers. The biggest loser of all may be American-style capitalism itself. In retrospect, Greenspan was overrated, and his free market fundamentalism, coupled with rampant fraud, outrageous leveraging, and reckless credit, have led us to a point where, ironically, Greenspan's greatest nightmare, inflation, may emerge as the grim reaper of the mountains of debt we have piled up. It is bad enough to see your house lose value, but when your money loses value, you will know the banks and companies that should have failed have devoured our economic seed corn, leaving Main Street with potholes, but the gilded towers on Wall Street remain intact. The decline of ethics in an era of unaccountability may be coming to an end, but there doesn't appear to be any likelihood of a Pecora-style investigation to name and shame, let alone a perp walk, unlike the aftermath of the looting of the savings and loan when Bill Black sent hundreds to jail. So, as we cast about like Diogenes, searching for an honest man, let me introduce tonight's guest, who will speak for about 15 minutes. Then we'll have a conversation, followed by extensive Q&A from the audience. Dr. William K. Black is a professor of economics and law at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, where he teaches public finance, antitrust, law, and economics. He was the executive director of the Institute for Fraud Prevention from 2005 to 2007, and was formerly the litigation director of the Federal Home Loan Bank Board and senior deputy chief counsel of the Office of Thrift Supervision. He was also deputy director of the National Commission on Financial Institution Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement. An expert on white-collar crime, Dr. Black is the author of The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One. And in between consulting for the government of Iceland and the World Bank, he recently appeared on PBS's Bill Moyers Journal. Ladies and gentlemen, William K. Black.
Thank you, Hammer Forum, for arranging this. Thank you, who made all of this possible, for coming. In addition to my other sins, I'm primarily a white-collar criminologist, and I focus on what happens when the CEO is the crook. Okay? So I'm going to address two primary and related questions. Why do we have repeated, intensifying economic crises? And what can white-collar criminology add to our understanding of what's going wrong and how to fix it so we can adopt better policies that can produce fewer crises in the future? And I'd like to start with a slide to get across what Ian talked about, the insanity of the system. I want to demonstrate the insanity of the system. So I'll let you read this. Okay, so this punctuation is in the original. I didn't make it up, the all caps and the triple exclamation point. Here's the context. The professional rating type guy at Standard & Poor's has been assigned to evaluate one of these complex financial derivatives that you've been reading about that cause the biggest losses. And it's a derivative that is backed by subprime home loans. And so he is asked for what's called here the loan tapes. That simply means the loan files that we put on computer tape, so that he can review a sample of the loan files to evaluate their credit risk, because that's what a credit rating agency does, right? So it's a pretty standard request, you might think. This is the response he gets from his boss, and this is a high-level boss at Standard & Poor's, that it is totally unreasonable to ask for the files so that you could evaluate the credit risk if you're going to give a credit risk rating. Right? This is significantly insane at this level, right? But why is it totally unreasonable? Well, the stated reason is that the investors, that means the investment banks that are buying these subprime mortgages, pooling them together and creating these derivatives, don't even have the loan information themselves. In other words, they did zero due diligence before they bought this toxic waste. They're now bringing it to the rating agency, which is going to do how much due diligence? Zero. Because the boss is furious that the professional guy actually wants to look. Now, what rating do you think they're going to end up giving? AAA. What is a AAA rating supposed